All right, guys. So, welcome to an episode of the Flexwork Podcast. We're now doing remote podcasts with exceptional guests from all across the world. And today we have a man named Wayne Boatwright with us. Wayne, how's it going, man?
Good, man. It's good, Ankur. Good to be here.
So, Wayne's story is super unique and very different from the things that I have been talking about on the Flexwork Podcast. Wayne, where are you located?
I'm based in San Francisco, California.
I am so jealous. Well, not really, because the weather isn't great in San Francisco, but you have a basketball team that's worth talking about all the time.
Oh my gosh. And I got to tell you, this season's playoffs, they are the most brutal I have ever seen. They are letting these guys really go at it. I've got a 21-year-old son, and we were actually talking about it earlier today because obviously we're big Dubs fans, and the Warriors are doing really well right now. So, and unexpectedly well. Right. So
the only reason I know is because my wife won't let me sleep. She's watching the games late at night. She's a huge Dubs fan. It is what it is. We were on a vacation. We went to San Francisco. She's like, you have to take me to the stadium. I got to buy a T-shirt from the stadium. And I'm like, okay, babe, whatever you want. No problem.
Well, and it's not exactly on point, but I got to tell you, an organization I'm on the board of called Man to Man, which we'll be talking about later, we have a formal relationship with the Warriors. We actually got to go to their practice facility about 6 months ago and see all the steps they put these guys through when they get them ready for games. And we've been to the stadium. We've been down on the floor. We've got to meet the team. They're big boosters of this idea of trying to reunite families through fathers and getting these fathers back in their kids' lives, which is central to my I call it my post-fall mission. So yes, I reached a height and I fell, and now I'm doing a lot of work with trying to help family reunification and bring fathers back into their children's lives.
Well, I mean, Wayne, it's so cool that we're able to do this remote, literally on different sides of the country. And I mean, this is one of the first remote podcasts we're doing for the Flexwork show. So this is definitely exciting. And big shout out to Tyler Sherman for introducing us and setting up this podcast. But let's dive in. So,
sure.
Wayne, I think the thing that people at home need to truly understand is that you've had a roller coaster of a life journey across everything that you've gone through, the personal growth that you've been through. But if I had to define your life from what little I was able to read and research in the 2 weeks before I knew that we were going to be having this face-to-face, you're someone that has been extremely self-aware of what it is that our choices lead to and how to live with our choices. And the person that you are today, honestly, is I respect it so much because I'm sure that your mission of if you could just help one person not repeat those mistakes, I'm sure you've done it countless times. I'm sure we don't even know the number of people whose lives you've helped change at this point. And it's truly amazing. It's truly amazing. So, I mean, if people don't say thank you enough, I would like to thank you for what you do for the community and society. But let's maybe tell the audience what it is that you've been through, what you do now, and let's fill them in a little bit on what I know that they don't know yet.
Gosh, thank you so much for saying that, Ankur. I am self-aware, but I can honestly say that it wasn't fully by choice. I think that's a fair statement. I'm the classic American success story. I should be an immigrant, for heaven's sakes, even though my family came here in the 1600s, because, I was raised by a single mom with a half brother and a grandmother in rent control housing in LA. And yet I went to school and I studied hard and I went to college and was able to help my family by working before I went to college, actually, and bought my family's first car and their first color TV and able to help them that way. And then I got to chance to go to Cornell Law School, and I got a great law degree in business. Not your traditional lawyer like you see on TV. I'm not a litigator. I'm not a criminal lawyer. I did business law. And I worked in LA for a couple of years. Then I worked in Seoul, Korea for 6 years. Then I had a global position with Accenture a big consulting firm, traveled all over the world with them. And when I say all over the world, I mean Athens, Tokyo, Sydney, Paris, London, Madrid, Munich,
Man, do you still have that
wherever,
passport with all the stamps?
Yes, I kept that old passport because I filled one out and I had to get an extra one before it expired, believe it or not, because I was traveling so much.
But when
then got into the
change?
tech world. And then got into the tech world and started that. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. That was the heights that I fell from. Well, it's interesting. I think self-aware ideas are like chandeliers for me. So I want your audience to have a little patience with me as I light the candles all around that old chandelier before we get to the light bulb event. But my journey engendered a great sense of pride because I had to be better, faster, and stronger. You don't go to Cornell Law School if you're not thinking like that. At least most people don't. Now that pride wasn't, I thought it was who I was, but it was just a defense mechanism I had developed because of my impoverished upbringing, let's call it, right? So I felt I had to be proud to protect myself. That was what that pride was for. But what that pride also did is it didn't allow me to reach out for help when I needed it. And we live a long life in this world. And so as I matured, I started coming across challenges in my career and in my family that I wasn't prepared for. I didn't know how to deal with. And I used a coping mechanism, and I want to use that term deliberately. I don't consider it a disease. It's a coping mechanism. I don't consider it an addiction or just an addiction. It's a coping mechanism. And that's alcohol. And I found myself relying on that coping mechanism more and more as time went on. So I started drinking a lot, and I started drinking alone, and I started drinking at home alone, and I started drinking during the day at home alone. And I hid it the best way I knew how because I was a functional alcoholic. But I used that mechanism of coping to help me kind of hide from the challenges I was facing in other facets of my life. And I'm deliberately being generic here because everybody has different challenges. And so they come to that place in different ways. But the coping mechanisms is a constant. It's a fundamental principle. It's a first principle. We all have coping mechanisms we use. Some people eat too much. Some people use sex. Some people use sports or adrenaline or drugs. For me, it was alcohol. And in fact, I got so bad with alcohol that when I had to deal with some real challenges with my mother and my brother down in LA, I was commuting from San Francisco to LA, which if anybody knows, that's a really long drive. So I was doing that like every month for 6 months. And I thought it was a smart idea to deal with some of that by drinking Red Bull vodkas and then deciding to drive home from LA back to San Francisco late at night while I was drinking Red Bull vodkas. In fact, I was so drunk, and I had drunk so much by that time that I was blackout drunk and don't even remember that I got into a car accident that on the 5 freeway, a head-on collision on the 5 freeway that ultimately killed someone and wounded 3 other people. I was that guy. I was that drunk driver. And I couldn't imagine, I never imagined that could be me.
Man, that is got to be one of those scenarios where when you come to, you must have been mortified when they told you what happened. I mean, were you
flashing back right now when you say that with those 2 highway patrolmen standing in front of me when I become conscious in the hospital that they had to medevac me to tell me what happened?
Man.
I was the monster. Do you understand? I had become the monster in other people's lives.
I understand. I mean, most of my audience doesn't know this, but I got a DUI situation when I was literally on my 21st birthday. And I was coming home and I fell asleep behind the wheel, combination of bad choices and just being exhausted from being a workaholic. But it happened again when I went through, a similar coping set of decisions that were wrong. And it was in the past couple of years of my life, and it really smacked me on my ass. And it took me a lot of personal growth and change for me to make some lifestyle changes so that I could be better. But man, I can't even imagine what it would have been like if I woke up from a blackout situation with 2 state troopers over me telling me what happened. And I mean, it sounds like if you had to be medevaced, you were injured, right? So now you
I spent 90 days in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
It was a head-on collision on a freeway. I broke my neck, ribs, my pelvis, shattered my foot. I had to get a plate and 8 screws inserted. So I was in the hospital for 90 days before I moved on to a wheelchair and then a walker and all that stuff. So yeah, I was injured, but it doesn't matter. I mean, I was the cause of this tragedy, this crime. And
So in coping
I never
with that,
imagined I could be that person, right? I was
I know.
somebody else.
I know. I remember after the last DUI, I went and got help. And I just remember when it finally hit me that I could have killed someone with the choices that I was making, my heart sank. And when I realized the amount of times that I could have killed someone, and I was just so lucky that I wasn't in that position and I didn't meet the full potential of becoming someone who had done that, I couldn't even imagine the pain and the heartache and how sad you must have been. I know for me, I was in a situation I talk about all the time on my podcast where I was in hundreds of millions in personal valuation, right? Because I had a startup that was on a rocket ship and then I lost everything. I don't think that's the same as having to wake up and be someone who has taken a life in terms of like the grief and the loss and everything that happens through that. But I've been asked before, like, why didn't you just give up? Losing that kind of money and going into negative millions of debt and then having to crawl your way back up. I remember I felt like I was a bad human being for a very long time because it's not even like a handful. I mean, hundreds of people lost their job. And I was one of the few people that could have helped save their jobs because I had the power to make better choices in my executive role, right? But life put me where it did, and I had that type of guilt, and I chose to fight back. But I think my audience deserves to hear what was the moment where you started believing in yourself again, and how was that journey of fighting back to, I mean, hey, have you forgiven yourself?
No.
Yeah.
Um,
I can understand that. I sometimes don't forgive myself for everything that's happened in my life. But living with that regret and living with the decision of still needing to fight on and live a life and have purpose in everything that you're doing, which, by the way, I know you consider yourself a monster and you said that, you haven't forgiven yourself and whatever needs to happen with that. But man, the stuff you're doing today is so amazing. And that couldn't have been an overnight shift. There must have been a wild journey to get to where you are today, to where you could tell your story and have an impact on someone else. I mean, man, had someone just knocked me on my ass after the first DUI situation and set me straight, maybe I wouldn't have had the second one, right? But either way,
this is so interesting. Is that you have lived the life. My son is a junior at university and joined a fraternity. And so he had to make the same decision. And thank God he's made it earlier than me. And I went back to his school and spent over a week with him in his school as he had hit bottom and realized that he had to change his life. He was that 21-year-old. So no, it can happen at 21. You might be helping people at 21 make that decision. And please understand that alcohol is great for most people, just not great for me. I'm not
Yeah.
judging other people's using alcohol and as a social lubricant. That's great for them. If it makes them happy, more power to them. I just can't do it. And I didn't come to realize that until much later in life. But if we can help others who have a problem with alcohol recognize it earlier, it's a blessing because, I call it, I burned down my psychic delusion house that myself was living in, that was built up by my dreams and my faith and my experience and my actions and what people told me about myself. That was that psychic delusion house I built around to protect my identity and myself. And I burned that whole thing down.
How long did that take? Did it happen instantly?
No, it's a dead man bounce process. It doesn't happen instantly. And it didn't happen. There's a couple very powerful word you used, and then I'm going to get into another powerful concept. But the powerful word you used is exactly that, power. You realized you had the power over other people's lives. These employees that looked to you to feed their families. They looked to you to help them through whatever challenges they were going through because they had a job that they could rely on and trust. I think people misunderstand what murder is. You talk about the horror of it all. It's like, no, it's the power of murder. You think you know what power is? Take a life. Realize that you have the capacity to rip somebody out of existence and out of their family. When I recognized that I had that power, then I knew I had a duty to learn to control it. I couldn't let that happen again. I couldn't risk that happening again. And so that became my mission, I had to find out how I could be the person that lost control that way, to unleash that power. And then how could I use that power to control it so that it wouldn't be? It's like fire. It could do the most amazingly good things, or it could destroy everything. But you need to learn to control it. And so I took that responsibility very seriously. But I didn't take it seriously right away because I was taking more morphine than the average person. I was a big man, I mean, I had to take a lot of morphine for a long time. I was, not fully conscious, you might say, for quite a while. So no, it didn't come in a flash. I would say it didn't come until much later. In my case, it came when my wife of 14 years and the mother of my two children said she wanted to visit me in San Quentin alone so we could have an adult conversation. And she told me she was divorcing me. That's when I hit. That was the last bastion. That was the last room in my delusion house. That was the last thing I was holding on to, was my family and my marriage, that, for better or worse, we were going to survive everything. And then suddenly that was gone. That's when I hit true bottom. But even though I hit bottom, I had this responsibility. And the responsibility had grown, not just from the power of murder that I recognized I had, but the responsibility I had for two young children. Because believe me, I saw a lot of people use the exit of suicide in my life. And I can't say I wasn't tempted by it. But if I were to choose that option, what message would I be sending to my kids? Because I don't want them to ever choose that option. I want them to know that no matter what they've gone through, they can get through it and they can get past it and they can be a better person. They can survive those challenges. They'll have scars. I have scars, but I bear my scars with pride because I survived them. And I couldn't send that message to my children. So I had to find a way through this. That's when I hit bottom. When I got that message.
Before we jump into last time in and everything that your organization is doing right now, I guess one of the questions I have is related to podcasting, right? This means of talking to people and telling your story and sharing your story. I mean, from what I can tell, you've been on several podcasts. and you're very open with your story. And like you said, just trying to help one person would make it all worth it, right? This purposeful mission that you're on. What is it about podcasting that you love? Because trust me, if I didn't love the journey of podcasting, what it is, I wouldn't be so vulnerable and tell my truth and my stories and everything here.
I'm a lawyer by training. Believe
You're not
it or
getting
not,
paid by the minute here.
I enjoy writing more than I enjoy speaking.
Okay.
For me, this is a service. A service I have to do. I owe a debt. I owe a debt to a family that lost their mother and grandmother. I destroyed 2 families with my crime. I destroyed my family. My children had to be raised by a single mother because of my actions. And I still don't know all the consequences of that, but they're significant. I hope that it's become a scar and it's not an open wound in their lives now. And I've worked very hard to make sure that they've become survivors and they're not victims. But that doesn't change the fact that I've done this to them, as well as my victim's family, as well as as society in general when I violate the norms of society. I do this as a service. I kind of look at life as there are 3 phases. You have to do introspection and understand yourself. And whether that's done through meditation or prayer or whatever gets you to understand yourself and think about it. And then you have to have creative self-expression. So this is a form of creative self-expression. You put yourself out in the world, right? And see how people respond to it. And that could be sports. It could be arts. It could be podcasts or writing or your career. It could be a form of creative self-expression. But in the end, it becomes hopefully you get to a level of service where you're helping others. So I seek to help others is the way I look at this. But as you can imagine, this podcast has shown me things about myself that I didn't know because you ask the right questions and it comes out. It's also been a form of creative self-expression, but I also consider it a service. And I think what attracted me to podcast was that service component. But I've noticed that in all 3 of these facets of my life, it's helped improve me. For me, that's how I see podcasting.
So Wayne, how has the public reacted?
I think it has been surprisingly positive, in the sense that, I don't, I understand technology very well, I believe, compared to most people. And so I've seen many podcasters who unfortunately have been captured by their audiences. I've called it audience capture. And so their message changes because they're replying to their audience. And so I try not to allow myself to be captured by my audience. So yes, there may be 300 comments to this podcast and there may be a lot of thoughts about it. I try not to reply to those or even read them because I am afraid. I'm trying to inoculate myself against audience capture. So I got to be honest, I'm not quite sure how my audience has responded to a lot of this. There are a lot of comments, and I hope they're positive, but do you know who Jordan Peterson is? Does that name ring a bell?
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Great. Somebody, when I was in prison, sent me Maps of Meaning, An Architecture of Belief, his first book. He wrote it in the 1990s, late 1990s. If you haven't read that book, I appreciate all the stuff he's done recently. The recent stuff is like popcorn. Go back to Maps of Meaning. So I knew him before I knew he was a famous YouTuber and podcaster. I believe he's been captured by his audience. And so his message has become more strident and is less appealing to me. I don't want to become that. I want to have an independent voice. And so I've stayed away from how my audience responds for that reason.
I mean, I give you accolades. The level of courage it takes to admit what happened and to publicly talk about it. It took me a long time to be able to talk about my stuff. I was afraid there would be lawsuits, right? In my journey of trying to heal, you had to accept that you played a role in the downfall, right? And in the, for lack of a better word, people who were victims that I couldn't help or that I should have helped or however I want to look at it. And I was afraid, if I start talking about it, well, maybe there'll be lawsuits. Maybe there'll be a class action against me. Maybe some of the old partners would come after me and be like, yep, look, he just admitted blame. So he's the person who messed up, and everyone else could stay away from their blame on what the problem was and what happened. But eventually when I realized it doesn't really matter how other people point blame, and sure, societal impressions of everything have a place in how we see ourselves and everything that goes with it. But I had to figure out how to live with it. And, in full honesty, I don't really know if I've forgiven myself either for what I've been through. But what I do know is that no one is going to come to save me, even when I ask. And I've been blessed to have some really phenomenal friendships where people have come through for me when I've asked in ways that I couldn't even imagine that I was lucky enough to have, whether it was a financial loan just to survive, whether it was coming to work for me for free for a certain period of time as I was rebuilding a company so that I could stand on my own feet again, whether it was an opportunity for a business deal, any one of those types of things. But man, the courage that it would take to admit a crime on a public platform and then talk through it, even today, I would be afraid of the commentary and how people would react and what they would say, because, man, if someone, having made the mistakes I made, there's still people who look at me in fear that they think I'm going to show up drunk to an event. And I look at them and I'm like, I'm not that person anymore. But it breaks my heart that they look at me and still have that fear. And I can't even imagine what you go through.
Yeah, well, it's there's a lot of nostalgia for my prior life, in the sense that my friends all were HBS grads or Wharton grads. I was working in Silicon Valley. I had a friend who flew 100 of us to Marfa, Texas for his birthday party on his private jet that he leased. I got friends who've led a real high life. Yeah, those people can't talk to me anymore. They don't want to risk it, even though my sobriety is central to my existence. And because I've learned that my alcoholism was engendered because I was using it as a coping mechanism for an underlying issue. And I've learned to face that underlying issue and resolve it. So it's become a scar instead of an open wound. So I don't need to use the coping mechanism of alcohol. So I can be around alcohol. I can be around people having fun. And I'm not in the least bit tempted to join them because I don't need it anymore. I think about the example of like a guy like Matthew Perry, where we got to see his public tribulations around addiction. And I think many people are incorrectly, I think most of the professionals in this industry do a disservice to their patients and their clients because they're teaching them to build a wall around whatever triggers them for their addiction. And we're smart enough to find a way over, underneath, or around that wall and get to that trigger and use it. You've got to dismantle the trigger. You've got to find out what you're coping for if you want to stop the addiction. And I don't think enough people learn that lesson. Gabor Mate is a great guy who teaches about this, and he's got some very insightful views about it. Alice Miller is another one who's got some great insight into how childhood trauma can lead us into these dark places and how we can find a pathway out of them. I did a lot of work to find that pathway out. I studied ancient Greeks and dead Englishmen because it was a lot of philosophy that helped me that I read. And when I say ancient Greeks, I'm talking way back. I read pre-Socratic, not just Aristotle and Socrates and Plato. I read a lot of stuff trying to understand what is virtue and what is a good person and how I could become that person. Because I had realized by my crime, the power that I had. Life is not a game. This is life. Okay? So you talk about those so-called friends and how they might treat you. Yeah, you're right not to care now. This is life. This isn't a game. And you got to take it seriously. And I look to find ways to scale my activities because I worked in Silicon Valley for a while. And I see a lot of people in the advocacy nonprofit space that I believe, I'm sorry, this is an opinion. They do it for themselves. They feel good by what they're doing, but they're not helping that many people. They're just doing these public displays of virtue signaling, in my opinion. I want to find stuff that can scale, that can help as many people as possible out of where they're at. And that doesn't have an easy solution or an easy blame. Humans are complex beings. And to find that way out, we all need to find our way out. And there are different tools that I seek to use and I seek to share with others that are scalable, that others can use, not to do it one-on-one, not to do it in small groups, but to do it at scale, because I think that's where I want to make a difference. And that's what I try to do with these podcasts.
So before I forget, we got to tell people about Last Time In and what
Sure.
you're doing and the purpose of why you started it and everything behind it.
Well, and I want to give full credit where it's due. Stuart Borelli is the one who came up with it. He is an African-American, now minister, PhD, used to be a Marine Corps sergeant. Whew. I don't know about you, but Marine Corps sergeants, yeah. He had that life before, and he became a single father. And so he and I bonded over fatherhood. And we bonded over aspiration. Think of that title, Last Time In. It's an aspirational goal to have this behind you, to not be going back to prison, to not be going back to the street life, to not be doing those things. And what I discovered inside, because none of my friends had ever gone to prison. I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't know anybody who had. You know, the guys inside, they have multiple interactions with the criminal justice systems, usually. They go to prison multiple times. But I would also say the majority of them didn't have a father as a role model, or they didn't have a good role model if they had one. Many of them were raised by single mothers. And Stuart and I worked together to realize that fatherhood was the essential item that was missing. But the fathers had to learn how to be a father. You know, how could they become the father they never had? That's the message we're trying to teach with Last Time In and with the organization called Man to Man. Man to Man is trying to teach that message. And you know, we've gotten other people who recognize it. We've got a formal relationship with the Golden State Warriors now at Man to Man, where they're working with us. And we're trying to form one with the San Francisco Giants, the baseball team, because those sports organizations are great tools to help fathers and children bond. And we want to have that. But the goal is to become the father they never had. That emotional intelligence, you know, I think over the last 10 years, people have underappreciated the changes that have occurred in the behavioral sciences. You know, we focus on the technology, but the behavioral sciences are changing very, very fast right now. And I'd say that's what we're working on at Man to Man, is to help these men become the fathers they never had, so they can keep a job, so they can learn nonviolent communication, so they can stop domestic violence, so they can recognize when sexual abuse is happening and to stop it, and to be better fathers, be better parents, be better people, be better employees. That's the dream. And I'm very proud of that organization. And we're doing a lot of work, and we're expanding. We've got two different groups we do in San Quentin right now. And in July, we're going to another prison. We'll have another 2 groups. We're hoping to be in 7 different counties before the end of the year, spreading this message here in Northern California. So, the message is getting out there and we're making a difference, but it's based upon the concept, the aspirational goal of being the fathers they never had, and the aspirational goal of Last Time In, right? That this time they're going to learn what they need to learn so they don't have to go back, because they haven't been learning the tools they need to. Let's be honest. Or they wouldn't be going back again and again and again.
Man, I can't even imagine what it's like trying to break through with people who've lost faith in themselves and the system. And I've heard stories and the horror scenarios of how the system makes it so hard to just carve your own way out. I think for the audience that's listening to this podcast, there's probably a lot of them who can relate to this idea of like becoming the mentor you never had, right? In business and entrepreneurship, I remember like I used to have this silly analogy of like the Pretty Woman scenario where Richard Gere comes and finds Julia Roberts and like shows her this whole other lifestyle and just changes her life, right? With the snap of his fingers and like heals her and like everything that needs to happen. Just sillily saying like, I wish there was someone like that for me. Like, why isn't there a billionaire recognizing my potential and my skill set and just coming down and like sprinkling some magic and showing me a different world? Because there's so many people now that they talk about how success isn't always earned. A lot of times it's given. All right. And like, why don't I have that scenario in my life? Why do I have to earn it every single time? But very early on, I recognized that I have to go become the mentor that I wish I had. Right. I can go become that Richard Gere that is going to go help the next person. I can be the CEO that I wish I had for all my employees with transparency and honesty and being the first one and last one out. But man, is it hard to be the person that you wish you had, and man, does it feel unfair, right? It's like the oldest child syndrome that has to go through all those scars and battle wounds with their parents for that younger siblings don't have to go through, and like that they'll never understand that pain or that loneliness or whatever comes with it. But Wayne, I'm so appreciative of your candor and your honesty. And I could tell just from talking to you, right? You are everything I thought you were going to be. Self-aware, purpose-driven, on a mission to make a difference. And like I said earlier, if people don't thank you for what you're doing, I thank you for what you're doing. And I feel blessed that I made some better life choices after finally breaking down my delusions. And, I don't have those coping needs anymore because I figured out what was causing my triggers and I figured out how to deal with them. It doesn't necessarily mean that I've solved the problem, but I don't need to cope with it in ways that are damaging, right?
That's right.
And yeah, just coming back, man, thank you for what you're doing. I hope that there's enough people in the world that are listening, they're willing to listen to what you are saying and find hope and find a path forward. And, it's one thing to have the aspiration, but it's another thing to have someone say that they believe in you and that they will help you, or that, they believe that you will help yourself get to that next place. And it's exciting to know that people like you exist.
I'm so glad, like I said, I learn more from these podcasts often than I ever imagined. As I've learned to recognize where I call it the blind spots that we have, that thing I can't see, but it's obvious to everybody else often, but I can't see it. I don't know what they're talking about,
Yeah.
And I never could have a mentor in my life because I didn't trust men. Because I was raised by a single mom and a grandmother who didn't trust men. And so I would learn that you don't trust men. And I didn't realize I had learned that lesson very young. And I didn't realize it was a lesson. I thought it was like a law of nature, right? It's like, but it's not. There are many wonderful, trustworthy men. They're wonderful fathers. And so I had to unlearn these things as I grew up. But I'm going to take on that challenge you just laid down. I will become the mentor that I never had for others. And I've realized I've started that. I'm working with Web 3.0 stuff because I used to be a techie. And so I'm dealing with a lot of stuff around the blockchain and ledger technology and what are called distributed autonomous organizations, or DAOs. And DAOs are a new way of organizing entities. Think of corporations and partnerships and LLCs as like big fish. And a DAO allows you, because of the blockchain, to create a school of fish that can do the activities of the big fish, right? So look at it like a school of individuals acting together in concert. That's what a DAO allows. And so in this DAO class, I got a young engineer guy, and I had some problems learning how to create a wallet and all the crypto stuff and all that. So I told him I was going to hire him to help me learn how to do it, right? So we set a time and everything and a budget for me to hire him. And he showed up late. And most people would just say, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. And no, this is business. I said, hey, look, if you want my respect, you showed up late, and there has to be a consequence for that. And so I made him work for free for an hour to help me. But I'm going to hire him again next week, and I guarantee you he'll show up on time, and he'll do the work I need him to, and I'll pay him. That's what a mentor does, I think. At least that's what I wish I had when I was younger. So I'm going to take your challenge. I want to become the mentor to others that I never had, and not grouse about the fact I never had one. I just got to suck it up. That's just, embrace the suck. That's just my choice, my life. It doesn't mean other people have to go through what I went through. Let me help them not go through it. Let me become the mentor that they need. So I'm going to take the challenge. That's the way I hear what you said. And Ankur, I'm going to take it up. We should circle back in like 6 months and see where that's gone, because I want to help others become the people they could be, that they may not even see the potential of, right? I want to help them do that.
Well, if I can leave you with one thing from having been through this journey of trying to be that mentor for other people, much like love languages, there are like mentorship mentee languages, and not everyone will appreciate tough love in all those scenarios. But
sure,
I spend so much time analyzing the people around me and trying to come up with game plans for how I can properly mentor and properly train and properly guide. And it is such an educational activity to try and get those answers from the people around you. And when I can't figure it out, I just go ask them. Like, hey, what is the best way that you learn? Or what's the best way for me to guide you? And like, how can we make this work in the way that you want it to be? Because, I firmly believe when you hear guys like Simon Sinek talk about what a CEO's responsibility is like, you work for the staff, right? The team is here to solve problems and do their job and do what they do. And the CEO works for them to remove obstacles and everything that needs to happen. So I just hope that if that's the one piece with accepting that challenge, just remember, not everyone receives mentorship and menteeship the way that we do.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, spending 6 years in San Quentin on the main line, and the general population, made me a hard man. Not cruel, I hope. I don't take pleasure in it. But I've got to be truthful with people because I want to help them the best way I know how. And it will always be the best way I know how. If I can learn a better way than telling that kid he has to work for free, I'll use it. That was just the best thing that I could think of. But I try my best because this ain't a joke. This is real. This isn't a game. This is life. And I got to do the best I can.
I'm going to text you in a week and everybody, did he show up on time? Or was he late again? Because I can tell you, sometimes I got to learn lessons twice.
Well, it takes a while for me to learn lessons. Trust me. I know that. But at least if I'm on the path, you got to be on the right trajectory, even if you haven't arrived at where you want to go, right?
No, for sure. Wayne, thanks for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to hopefully one day meeting you in person, whether it's in San Francisco or if you're ever out here on the East Coast. But
I enjoy that.
Thanks so much for being here. And I guess, is there any last question or last piece of wisdom or like your contact information? Like, what would you like to... I will give you the man-to-man link that'll be in the show notes. I'd greatly appreciate that. I'm also going to give you the San Quentin News link. I was the managing editor of that prison newspaper when I was inside San Quentin. By the way, I never disclosed I was a lawyer when I was inside. I just told them I was an IT techie guy because I didn't want them bother me with their legal issues, Sure.
So I never said I was a lawyer inside, but they recognized I had talent. So I became the managing editor of San Quentin News and then the web manager when I got out. So I helped launch the website. So I'd love to give you both of those links to put in the show notes. So if people are curious about what can be done inside a prison. Man to Man teaches fatherhood principles and has a number of organizations and things we do, like Last Time In. And the San Quentin News talks about a much broader range of what's going on in the criminal justice system. And it's written by inmates, so you get to find out their view of the world. You don't have to agree with it, but you should hear their voices and know the way they see the world. And that's what comes out in the newspaper. So I'm going to give you those 2 links to put in the show notes if you don't mind.
No, happily, for sure. So, like I said, Wayne, thank you so much for being part of the podcast, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. I will.